Welcome. My name is Kyle Bateman. Thank you for coming to the lesson today. We will be discussing the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, of 1990. We're going to focus on three questions. Question number one, what is the ADA? Question number two, what led to the ADA? Question number three, what's happened in our world because of the ADA? Let's start with question number one. The ADA can be defined as national legislation standards for accessibility and accommodations for those who have disabilities. The whole purpose of the ADA is going to be the removal of barriers. Up here, I have drawn the B word. Maybe not the B word you were thinking about, but it's still bad. And it's the word barriers. People with disabilities, historically and even now, come across a lot of different barriers. Physical barriers, social barriers, policy barriers. We'll discuss that just a little bit more now as we look at a case study from Africa. What's an example of physical barriers? So in many African countries, girls are educated with boys. And that happens up until the time that the girls turn 12 or 13 years old. And then their education rates slide off. But why is that? What's happening in these African places that leads to these girls giving up on their education? It's actually something really easy. Those schools only have bathrooms for the boys, and they don't build bathrooms for the girls. At 12 or 13, girls start to mature, and in that maturity, they need greater accessibility to hygienic facilities, is what we'll say. So, no bathrooms, no schooling. That's a physical barrier. Another example of a barrier was shown in a recent newspaper from the Middle East, and it says that disabled get cold shoulder at booths. In a Middle Eastern voting scenario, a lot of these people who had mobility devices weren't allowed to vote because they couldn't make it up the stairs into the structure that was hosting the election. And so they either had to be carried up the stairs or they had to just not vote. That's a policy and a physical barrier. So if these are some of the barriers, we can see why the ADA would want to eliminate some of those for the equal civil rights of people with disabilities. Now let's go into the history, which actually came about because of the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and the 60s. So the Civil Rights Act, you might be familiar with, was really fought hard for by our man Martin Luther King Jr. and all of the people who worked with him. And you remember the I Have a Dream speech on the Lincoln Memorial? Yeah? When he said that I have a dream that my children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Soon after that, the Civil Rights Act was passed, which eliminated or made illegal discrimination by race, age, sex, religion, etc. But they left out disabilities. That had its own civil rights fight for the next 3.5 decades, up until the late 80s and the early 90s, when a man named Justin Dart took over as the charismatic face for the disabilities movement. And in 1990, in March, there was a protest led on Capitol Hill that was really influential in the passing of the ADA. And it's an example of a physical barrier. Capitol Hill, lots of stairs. But at that time, no elevators to get in, no ramps, no curb cuts, and no chairlifts. So people who had mobility devices had to leave them at the bottom of the stairs and ascend the stairs to get into where the debate was being held. And that protest must have been well worth it because 3 months later, excuse me for speaking over here, because 3 months later, Congress and the President made law the ADA. Don't mind the date. It was July of 1990, not March 2013. Now let's read what George Bush said about this particular moment. He said, 3 weeks ago, we celebrated our nation's Independence Day. Today, we are here to rejoice in the celebration of another Independence Day, one that is long overdue. With today's signing of the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act, every man, woman, and child with a disability can now pass through once closed doors into a bright new era of equality, independence, and freedom. As I look around at all these joyous faces, I remember clearly how many years of dedicated commitment have gone into making this historic new civil rights a reality. Essentially, the ADA legally removes the barriers. Thank you so much for coming to the lesson today. I'm really sorry I had to cut it short. I was just given 3 to 5 minutes, and so I hope that you enjoyed the roughly 5 minutes that you saw and learned about the ADA. I hope to hear from you guys soon, and thank you so much for your time.